First CHIKARA and now Evolve. That's two promotions gone in the span of 2 weeks. WWE this week, although this is a little bit different. In the case of CHIKARA, Mike Quackenbush just shut the whole thing down. In this case, WWE officially acquired the Evolve Wrestling promotion and library and assets. Evolve, of course, was run in part by Gabe Sapolsky, who now works for the NXT brand. He was brought in as a consultant, really, to work with Triple H and the NXT brand, and I take it that now he's just going to be a full-time employee of WWE and the NXT brand behind the scenes. Per PW Insider, the deal was closed after several months of negotiations. And, it's an ominous sign for other independent promotions. Evolve was considered to be one of the bigger ones, at least here in this country. One of the bigger, long-lasting, for a good decade, independent promotions. And the pandemic really is what put the nail in their coffin. There were big plans for WrestleMania weekend. That was going to be their biggest week or weekend of the year. That did not happen. They couldn't piggyback off WrestleMania because really there was no WrestleMania. WrestleMania was contained into the to the Performance Center. And so all these other promotions that normally would run that weekend in the host city and would build everything around that weekend, and Evolve was no different, they didn't have that crutch. They didn't have that luxury this year, and that really hurt a lot of people, and it hurt Evolve. And to see something like this, that they felt the need, and I'll get into why here, in a little bit, but to go ahead and make this move now, I would imagine that they are not going to be the last independent promotion to run its final show. When all is said and done, right? They just don't know that they've run their final show. How many more stories like this are we going to hear in the weeks and months to come? Unfortunately, I'm expecting there to be more than a few. But WWE has been in bed with Evolve for a few years now. If you remember, it was a year ago this month, in fact. I think it was a year ago this month that WWE aired the Evolve 10th anniversary show live on the WWE Network, which was still to this day the only Evolve show that the company ever aired on the network, and the only non-WWE promotion, I believe, to ever air a show on the network. We had heard about Progress and ICW have agreements, which they do, with WWE, and that they're going to start running, or they're going to be airing shows of some sort on the network. And it was down to Vince McMahon, and he just wouldn't greenlight the move, or else it would have happened, and it never did. And now it may never happen. So Evolve remains the only non-WWE promotion to actually air, a live show on their network. That was the show with the Catch Point reunion match, Matt Riddle against Drew Gulak. I enjoyed that. So they will have complete rights now, will WWE, to air all of the Evolve events, if there are any going forward. It doesn't sound like there's going to be any new ones. Certainly they've got the library. Evolve was formed 10 years ago. 2010 was when Evolve came into existence, and it was the brainchild of two people. It was the brainchild, really, of Gabe Sapolsky and Bryan Danielson, at least in terms of the kind of the structure and the concept around what Evolve would be. So they had things like weight class. I don't know if they had weight classes, but they had win-loss records. It was sort of treating it more like a sport. A lot of different styles of wrestling all being brought together in one place. And the plan was to build around Bryan Danielson as the number one top star of the promotion. And then he ended up signing with WWE. And he never wrestled the match for Evolve. He didn't wrestle a match for Evolve until he got fired from WWE. That was after the Nexus debut and the tie choking incident with Justin Roberts. There was a period of about a month and a half or 2 months there where Danielson said, well, I'm going back out onto the indie circuit. And he did wind up in Evolve. He wrestled at least one match for the promotion, but that was the whole original concept. We're going to build around Bryan Danielson, and then Bryan Danielson all of a sudden had to look out for his own future, and he was no longer available. So the last show Evolve ran officially was March 1st. That was right before everything here in this country went on lockdown. It has been a feeder system of sorts for WWE for a while now, in an official capacity. Unlike Ring of Honor, which had been looked at as almost like this unofficial feeder system for WWE for so many years, as in a lot of their talent wound up working for WWE. a lot of that Evolve or Ring of Honor talent are now the kind of the big names in WWE or making up the mid card in WWE or have passed through the doors of WWE. Although there was never any working relationship with Ring of Honor and WWE like there was with WWE and Evolve. Quite the opposite. There was a lot of animosity there. They definitely were not working together in sync. And then once NXT came into existence, that really, I think, in many ways, you can trace I don't want to say the fall of Ring of Honor, because Ring of Honor is still around. Ring of Honor has had years since then where they've done well, and obviously they have Sinclair now backing them up and owning them. But I think the bloom was off the Ring of Honor rose in many ways once NXT really took hold, because NXT, especially in those early years, in a lot of ways is really what Ring of Honor was. It was sort of the belle of the ball. A lot of people talked about Ring of Honor has the best talent and the best indie talent. That's why WWE wants to steal and raid all of their talent and stuff. And what WWE did was they created their own little version of Ring of Honor. They created their own little indie. Triple H went all in. After all these years of kind of thumbing their nose and looking down on independent wrestlers in the independent scene and that style. And then they had different phases where they're only recruiting people who are of a certain size, 6'2", 240 pounds. A lot of the Ring of Honor roster certainly didn't qualify under those standards back then. WWE, it's sort of like, well, we're just going to make our own. And then NXT became the popular thing, and it took a little bit of the shine, honestly. Not only did it take a lot of the shine away from Ring of Honor, a lot of the talent that normally would have gone to Ring of Honor, instead, they just completely bypassed ROH, and they got deals to come to the Performance Center and come and join the NXT brand. So there's probably a lot of talent that would have landed in promotions like ROH that never did, because now WWE, well, we created our own little, indie of sorts, and we're just going to bring people in here and sign them to deals and start hoarding people, as many as we can, because we don't want them going to places like Ring of Honor. So again, there was never any kind of formal working relationship between those two, but WWE sure did like their talent. That they did. I think if nothing else with this Evolve thing, the tape library would have value for them, given how many freaking people they have under contract right now, how many people they have on television, on USA and Fox, right now, who passed through the doors of Evolve. So you want to do some kind of documentary or DVD or big video package for somebody in a few years when Matt Riddle or somebody is challenging for the World Championship in the main event of WrestleMania. Now you have access to the Evolve footage. You own it. You can splice it into video packages and put together these cool little features on their background and how they came up in the business. So for that reason alone, I think there's value there. Apparently they also, or the belief anyway, is not only do they get the Evolve library, but they get the old Dragon Gate USA video library. And there were a lot of names that passed through there as well. I mean, some of the former Evolve talents, and this is not all of them, I just jotted down some of the obvious ones, just to give you a sense, who are now working for WWE or NXT. It reads like a laundry list. I mean, in the case of Jon Moxley, he's no longer in WWE, but Jon Moxley, back in the day was in Evolve. Apollo Crews, Austin Aries, Austin Theory, Cedric Alexander, Drew Gulak, Bobby Fish, Kyle O'Reilly, Matt Riddle, Timothy Thatcher, Tony Nese, Brody Lee, Keith Lee, Johnny Gargano. I mentioned Matt Riddle. Matt Riddle, who just made his SmackDown debut and is doing well so far, when they're not talking about his feet, which they seem to be obsessed with, and I'll talk about that when I get to SmackDown later. When he was in Evolve, Riddle had gotten an offer. There was interest from New Japan Pro Wrestling. And the thing on Riddle was I couldn't understand when I first really started to see Riddle, and Riddle was kind of exploding on the independent scene. And I was impressed. I would see some of his matches, and I was impressed by the guy. And there were people making comparisons. Oh, he's like a young Kevin Von Erich, and not just because of the bare feet, but just the look and everything. This guy, you got to build around a guy like this. And I said, well, why is WWE not bringing him in? And then the big knock on him was always the pot, right? So WWE, supposedly they were hesitant because of the pot usage And they didn't want to bring anybody in like that because at the time that was a real issue and they started fining people. You know, people were still smoking it anyway. They were just considering it like a pot tax. And I just said, that what a dumb reason. Like, you've got potentially a lot of money that you can make in this guy. You make it sound like he's on the street corner. He's got the thing wrapped around his arm like he's shooting heroin. Sign this guy. Because if you don't, somebody else is going to. And somebody else almost did. And that somebody was New Japan Pro Wrestling. And the thought of Riddle in New Japan, I mean, that would have been sick. But I guess once WWE got wind that there was interest from New Japan, they were like, all right, you know what? Hey, it's time to sign Matt Riddle. And that's when he signed a contract. And who knows how different things may have been. When they signed Riddle, I think it was less than a year later that AEW came into existence. What if Riddle would have ended up as one of the key stars of All Elite Wrestling? You know, where would he be? Would he be one of the linchpins in the company right now? Very, very likely. Very likely he would be an important part of that roster, and he'd be one of those guys, like a Hangman Page or a Darby Allin, names that were never in WWE and were never popularized in that way, that AEW could have said, these are our guys, you know? Riddle could have been part of that crew. But I think it was the summer before, if I'm not mistaken, when he signed with WWE, so we'll never know. But anyway, Ricochet, he's another name who passed through Evolve. Shotzi Blackheart, one of the more recent names they've signed from Evolve. And there's so many more I'm not even thinking of. You know, one man who would not have nice things to say about his time at Evolve would be Darby Allin. I know he does not like Gabe Sapolsky. I don't know all the reasons for why he wanted out of there so badly, if there were promises made that weren't kept, or if there was some kind of other issue, I don't know. But, you know, last fall, AEW had their Full Gear pay-per-view. And you know how before and after the pay-per-views, this is one of the things about AEW I like. They have these media scrums. So they had the media, I think it was before the show. And the media was crowded around Darby, and they're interviewing him, and they're asking him questions. And somebody asked a question, I think, about Evolve. I don't even know why it came up. But somebody asked about Evolve, and I just remember his exact quote was, I believe he said, to tell Evolve to go fuck itself. I believe were his exact words. He supposedly bought himself out of his Evolve contract so that he would actually have the freedom to leave. Like the British Bulldog had to spend $250,000 of his own money to buy himself out of his WWF contract after the Montreal Screwjob just to get out of there. And then he went to WCW. If only Owen Hart had been afforded the same luxury, who knows? Well, I think we all know, but who knows how different things may have turned out. Owen was the one guy they said, no, we're not going to let you go. They let Jim Neidhart go. They let the British Bulldog buy himself out. Owen Hart, though, he got a nice fat new contract, actually, to stay right where he was in WWE. But yeah, apparently Darby bought himself out, and he must have wanted out of there real bad. I don't know how much he spent, but that tells you something. That tells you something about the relationship with him and Evolve. But the reality is, you know, Evolve at the end of the day, even though they had the relationship with WWE, and Gabe has been working behind the scenes with Triple H and NXT now for a couple of years, and so there's that relationship. They were still an independent promotion. They were not really being funded by WWE. They were being supported by WWE. WWE would send talent to either work some matches on the Evolve shows or do meet and greets to try to boost ticket sales. There were a lot of benefits to the relationship with WWE. But they still had to make money. They still have to run shows, as any other independent promotion, I'm sure, or independent promoter would tell you. They don't have the luxury of not being able to run shows, let's say, for a full year and being able to stay in business. Because independent promotions, by their very nature, do not have much in the way of big financial backing. So Evolve fell victim to the same thing that a lot of other indies are experiencing right now. They don't run shows, you don't make money, you can't go on. They don't have a big television contract like AEW does with Turner, or like WWE has two of them, with NBC Universal and Fox, so they got the big Saudi Arabia deals that they got. They don't have that. They don't have that support. And honestly, business for Evolve, by all accounts, was not great. in recent times. It was not great. So they were really struggling. And if you remember, there was a whole thing a few years ago. Remember that whole Flow Slam was like the wrestling wing of this new streaming service, Flow Sports. And Evolve, or Evolve's parent company, I think was like the first big client, the first big wrestling client for the service. And they got a hell of a deal. There was a lot of money involved. This was going to be like a game changer for Evolve. Things didn't exactly work out. Their business model was not sustainable. And things went south very quickly. I guess they just couldn't bring other promotions in like they thought they would be able to. And they flopped. You know, Flow Slam was a gigantic flop. And that really hurt Evolve a lot. You know, and that was a few years ago, but that was in many ways sort of the beginning of the end for Evolve. There were lawsuits involved. I think there was a settlement. I have no idea how much money or what kind of compensation they got out of it, but clearly it was not enough. Clearly it was not enough. So WWE kind of propped them up a little bit by, you know, they signed this contract to kind of work together. It was some kind of working agreement that they signed. And I look at this and I say to myself, you know what it reminds me of? And not just because Gabe was sort of a protege of Paul Heyman in the old ECW, so there's that connection. And when ECW went away, the year after that is when Ring of Honor came to be. And Gabe was the head booker for Ring of Honor. So there are ECW parallels even directly to Gabe. But it does remind me in a lot of ways of ECW. And the way the WWE, they kept Evolve alive in many ways. In a similar way that they secretly funded ECW back in the 90s. For all the shit that WWE gets for being the evil empire, and it is in many cases well-deserved. I mean, let's be honest. It's not all BS, okay? There's a reason why, when you see some of the moves they make and stuff, there's a reason that people look at them as the evil empire. But without their support, without WWE support, it's very likely that one or both of those companies, ECW and or Evolve, would have ceased to exist long before they ceased to exist. You know, Vince McMahon even loaned Paul Heyman $500,000 at one point, very late in ECW's life. I think in 2000 maybe it was. He loaned him $500,000, money that I don't believe was ever paid back, because less than a year later, ECW was out of business. Although Vince McMahon, ever the businessman that he is, he certainly made well more than that back on the corpse of ECW once he gobbled up the assets and he started to make DVDs, The Rise and Fall of ECW. Oh, let's do ECW One Night Stand. Yeah, which was Rob Van Dam's idea. He had to coax Vince McMahon and convince him into doing it. And they ended up doing 2 of them. They even relaunched the ECW brand on Sci-Fi Network for a while. So believe me, Vince McMahon, off that $500,000 he loaned to Paul Heyman in 2000, he made a lot more than that off the back of ECW. And ECW's legacy and ECW nostalgia in the almost 20 years since then. I think his investment more than paid off in the end. Now, the other interesting thing about this sale, according to PW Insider, and this is key. This is key to the model that WWE has created and why, part of the reason why they enter into these working relationships like they have with some of the promotions in the UK. We've heard about this again, Progress, ICW, and probably a few others. And it was no different with Evolve, that when they sign these contracts, when they sign these deals with these promotions, there is a clause in the contract. There is a clause in the contract that basically states that WWE has the right at any moment that they see fit to either buy or make an offer to buy the promotion outright or acquire its assets. If there is interest from another company, if there is interest from an outside party, a third party, in buying, in this case, Evolve, and it sounds like there was. Somebody was sniffing around that was interested potentially in buying or acquiring the assets of Evolve Wrestling. And what happened is WWE got wind of this. Evolve had to tell them. And WWE then had the option. They were first in line. Do you give your blessing for us to go and negotiate with this third party to try to sell the company or make a deal of some kind? Or do you want to buy the promotion. And in this case, WWE decided, we're going to buy the promotion. We're not going to let somebody else come in and buy it. We have, as per the clause in the contract, the right to do so before anybody else can. And that's what they opted to do here. And so that's how this whole thing, ultimately, it came down to WWE really didn't want Evolve to go anywhere else. Didn't want to give anybody else a chance to swoop them up. And so they decided, we're going to take them on ourselves. Enough of this. So that's kind of what happened here. Have no idea what's going to happen to the Evolve talents. There's no indication that there are contracts. Like when WCW got bought, WWE picked up some of the talent contracts, but not all of them. I have no idea if that's the case at all here. It doesn't sound like it is. And so I'm sure some of the Evolve talents, though, that would have ended up anyway in WWE are going to end up coming to WWE, but not all of them. I think, was it JD Drake, I think, put a message out saying that he's a free agent now, and supposedly MLW has interest in him. So no idea where some of these talents are going to fall, where they're going to land. I would imagine some of them will come to the PC and will end up coming to NXT. But Evolve, as we know it, is no more. Much like CHIKARA. And again, as the weeks go on, whether it's allegations or whether it's COVID or whatever the case may be, there's been a lot of bad things happening to the wrestling business recently. And I don't think that it's the last that we're going to hear of stories like this. Maybe not a company quite as big as Evolve falling and going to the wayside. But unfortunately, I think this is just another in a long line of stories that are going to play itself out in the weeks and months to come.